My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 34 years old. And the strange thing about the moment your family finally stops pretending to love you is that it doesn't begin with screaming. It begins with something smaller, colder, a chair pulled half an inch too far from the table, a smile that never reaches anyone's eyes, a sentence spoken so casually it takes a second to realize it was meant to wound. That Sunday, my mother texted me 3 times before I left my apartment. First, we're all so excited to see you. Then, don't be late. And finally, the one that almost made me laugh when I read it in the elevator. It's been so hard getting everyone together. That should have warned me. Anytime my mother suddenly sounded soft, it meant she needed an audience for something ugly. The restaurant was one of those polished brunch places that tried very hard to feel effortless. White marble tables, hanging plants, overpriced coffee, waiters who looked like they had opinions about your shoes. I spotted my family immediately. My younger sister Abby was the first to see me. She looked up, rolled her eyes, and said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd actually come." Not hello, not happy birthday, not even a fake smile. Just that. My father was seated at the center of the table like he'd personally funded the building. My mother sat beside him, posture perfect, already halfway through a mimosa. Abby was to her left, and next to Abby sat her boyfriend, Kyle, wearing that smug expression people wear when they've only ever had consequences explained to them in theory. Our cousin Emma was there too, already taking pictures of the food like the eggs Benedict had cured something. The empty chair meant for me was shoved toward the far edge of the table, not beside my parents, not even near Abby, off to the corner, half out of the row, like someone had remembered me at the last second and decided that technically counted. My mother didn't even turn fully when she saw me. She just flicked her fingers toward the end of the table and said, "Just grab that seat. We're saving this row for the important people." There are moments in life when humiliation burns hot. This wasn't one of them. This was colder than that. This was the kind of insult so old, so familiar, that it didn't even sting right away. It just settled into the bones, like winter in a house with bad insulation. I stood there for a second, purse still over my shoulder, looking at all of them. And the strangest part was that none of them looked embarrassed. Not one. Kyle glanced at Abby like this was funny. Emma avoided my eyes, but not because she felt bad, because she didn't want to get involved. My father kept slicing into his steak like he hadn't heard a thing. I sat down. I ordered pancakes and black coffee, and I said nothing. That was always the role they liked best from me. Naomi the quiet one. Naomi the reasonable one. Naomi the daughter who made things easier by swallowing them whole. They went right back to talking over each other. Vacation homes. Emma's dog's social media account. Abby's classes. Kyle's latest half-formed business idea. No one asked how I was. No one asked how work was going. No one asked whether I'd eaten, slept, or survived the last week with my sanity intact. I watched my coffee steam between my hands and thought, with a kind of eerie calm, they really believed I'd keep doing this forever. When the food came, I didn't touch mine. I let the pancakes sit there getting cold while Abby laughed too loudly at something Kyle said. I watched my father order another round. I watched my mother correct the waiter's pronunciation of Gruyere like she was hosting a cooking show nobody had asked for. Then I stood up. No announcement. No scene. I walked straight to the front desk. The manager looked up with the polite panic of a man who had dealt with too many brunch people in one weekend. I smiled and said very calmly, "For table 12, put the entire bill on their tab." They insisted. He blinked. "I'm sorry?" I handed him my ID and nodded toward the dining room. "You can confirm it with the server," they insisted. He hesitated, confused enough to be cautious, but not enough to stop me. I made sure he had the right table number, thanked him, and walked out before anyone noticed I was gone. The air outside was sharp and bright. I remember that part clearly. The relief of sunlight, the clean snap of cold wind against my face, the almost ridiculous piece of walking away while they were still drinking. I didn't check my phone on the walk home. I didn't rush. I didn't rehearse arguments in my head. For the first time in years, I let myself enjoy the silence. 30 minutes later, my phone started exploding. First Sam, one of my cousins. Then another number from my mother's side of the family. Then Kyle, which was almost enough to make me laugh out loud, because Kyle never texted me unless he needed something. His message said only, "No context." That was when I knew it had gone beautifully. Apparently, the bill had landed with all the grace of a hand grenade. Someone had ordered Wagyu steak. Someone else had decided bottomless mimosas were a personal challenge, then discovered the fine print too late. The automatic gratuity had kicked in because of the party size. By the time tax settled on top of everybody's appetite and vanity, the total came out to over $1,600. Emma, incapable of experiencing a disaster without documenting it, posted a blurry photo of the receipt to her private story with the caption, "This brunch is turning into jury duty." I stared at that photo for a full minute, then laughed so hard I had to set my phone down. I found out later that my father had turned red and started shouting at the waiter. My mother argued with the manager and kept insisting there had to be a mistake. Abby, for once in her life, had nothing to say. That silence of hers interested me the most, because Abby was never silent unless reality had arrived before she had time to decorate it. By nightfall, the family group chat was dead. No one sent a passive-aggressive follow-up. No one tried the usual fake peacemaker routine. No, let's not make this bigger than it is. No, we're all family at the end of the day. Just silence. I should have known silence never meant peace with people like them. It meant strategy. The next morning, I opened my front door half awake, still holding a mug of coffee, and found my parents standing on my porch like debt collectors. They hadn't called. They hadn't knocked yet. They were just there, arms crossed, expressions sharpened into something rehearsed, as if they had arrived early to prepare their disappointment. My mother pushed past me the second I opened the door. My father followed without asking. That was another family specialty, treating my boundaries like decorative suggestions. I closed the door slowly behind them and stood there in my own apartment feeling, absurdly, like the visitor. They sat on my couch like they'd done this 100 times in their heads on the drive over. My mother began first. "You humiliated this family," she said, with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals. No, hello. No pretense. Just accusation. She said the brunch had been meant to show unity to extended relatives. She said people had been talking. She said my little stunt made us look fractured and petty. I looked at her for a long moment and asked, what part of unity was putting me in the corner and calling other people important? She ignored the question so cleanly it was almost artistic. Then my father reached into his coat pocket, took out the receipt, and laid it on my coffee table like courtroom evidence. "That," he said, tapping it once, "is the bill." I stared at him. He stared back. "You owe us $1,600. For 1 second, I thought he had to be joking. But my father had never been a man with a sense of humor, only entitlement with a necktie. I asked, "You're serious?" He leaned back. This was financial manipulation. I actually laughed then, because the alternative was screaming. "Financial manipulation?" "Yes," he said. "You coerced the restaurant into placing the check on us." The sentence was so ridiculous I almost admired it, as if I had orchestrated a criminal conspiracy over eggs and champagne, as if a full table of grown adults had no agency the moment a bill arrived. I asked him plainly whether he truly expected me to pay for a meal I didn't eat and alcohol I didn't touch. He said yes, not because it made sense, because according to him, it was about principle. My mother jumped in then, voice tightening with every word. She said I had been pulling away from the family for years. She said I acted like I was better than everyone. She said I never came to enough dinners, never helped enough, never gave Abby gas money without making it awkward. Ungrateful, distant, difficult. It was almost impressive, the way they could stack obligation on top of abuse and still act confused when the structure collapsed. I let them talk. I let them spend all their anger. And then my father called me a leech. That was the moment something inside me broke cleanly in half. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. I set my coffee down and said very quietly, "You want to call me a leech after everything I've covered for this family?" Neither of them answered. Maybe because they knew. Maybe because they thought naming the truth would give me too much power. So I did it for them. I told them I had spent years cleaning up after their messes. Financially, emotionally, quietly. I told them they had built an entire family culture around my patience and then confused that patience for weakness. I told them I was done being treated like the easiest target in the room just because I didn't raise my voice first. My mother stood up, face pale with rage. My father followed. For a second, I thought one of them might actually apologize. Instead, my mother said, "You've always been impossible when things aren't about you." Then they slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames in my hallway. I stood there in the silence afterward, heart pounding, coffee cold on the table. Part of me thought that was the end. That maybe they had delivered their performance, assigned blame, and would now disappear into a week or two of icy silence before pretending none of it had happened. I underestimated them. That night, I walked down to my car and stopped so suddenly my keys slipped out of my hand. Long, deep scratches carved across both sides. Not random, not subtle. The kind of damage that comes from anger with time to spare. At first, I thought it had to be coincidence. Some stranger, some drunk, some idiot kid with bad impulse control. Then I checked the building security footage the next morning. There he was, Kyle, Abby's boyfriend, pacing near the lot like a man trying to convince himself he wasn't doing anything stupid, then glancing around, stepping up to my car and dragging something metal down the side with deliberate pressure. I watched the clip twice, not because I needed confirmation, because I needed to understand the level of stupidity required to vandalize someone's car under a security camera and still think you were the smart one in the family. I didn't call the police. I saved the footage. I emailed it to Abby with no message attached. She left it on read. 2 days later, I came home from work and knew something was wrong before I even put my keys down. The room looked lighter, too open. I stepped into the living room and stopped. My television was gone. Not stolen by a stranger. Not taken in a break-in. Taken by my mother. The building manager confirmed it with embarrassed reluctance. She had come by with a moving dolly and announced she was reclaiming her property. The TV had been a birthday gift 3 years earlier. Apparently, in my family, gifts had expiration dates attached, especially when obedience ran out first. I stood in the empty space where it had been and felt something unexpected settle over me. Not grief, not even anger, certainty. Because what they didn't understand, what none of them had ever fully understood, was that I had been carrying more of their weight than they could afford to lose. Especially Abby. Especially college. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a dramatic warning text. I sat down at my laptop, logged into the tuition portal I had access to, opened the payment section, and canceled all future contributions. It took less than a minute. Just a few clicks. That was all. No speech. No threat. No announcement. She wouldn't find out until the next payment deadline hit. And I knew exactly what would happen when it did. Abby would panic. She would call my mother first, crying. My father would storm around the house looking for someone to blame. Kyle would decide somehow that this was also my fault in a way that justified another crime. The whole fragile little theater would catch fire, and this time I was going to let it burn. The storm didn't start with a conversation. It started with a missed call, then another, then a message from my mother that read like a medical emergency notification. We need to talk immediately. This is serious. 5 seconds later, my father followed up with a text in all caps. Naomi, what did you do? I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel intentional. Then Abby called. Of course she did. Her name lit up my phone, and for a second I almost didn't answer. Not out of hesitation, out of curiosity. I wanted to know what version of herself I was about to get. The entitled one, the fragile one, or the one that only appeared when something she needed was suddenly out of reach. I picked up. She was crying, not the sharp, controlled crying she used when she wanted sympathy. This was messier. Panicked. I don't know what happened, she said, her voice breaking. They're saying my payment didn't go through. There has to be a glitch, right? You need to call them. Please, Naomi, the deadline is today. There it was. Not hi, not how are you. Just urgency. Just need. Just expectation. I leaned back against the kitchen counter and let her talk herself into exhaustion. When she finally went quiet, I said calmly, There's no glitch. Silence. I canceled the payments. It was like the line dropped into ice water. What? She whispered. I canceled them, I repeated, 3 days ago. Her breathing hitched. You can't just do that. I almost smiled. I can, I said, and I did. The shift was immediate. The crying sharpened. You're going to make me lose my classes, she said. Do you understand that? I could get dropped. I could lose everything. I closed my eyes for a second, not because I felt guilty, but because I had heard this tone before. It was the same tone she used when she wanted gas money, when she needed help covering rent, when she decided something in her life was my responsibility. I didn't sign up to fund your education, I said. I stepped in because no one else could. That's not true, she snapped, the softness cracking. Dad was going to figure it out. I let out a quiet breath. 2 years, Abby. I've been paying half your tuition for 2 years. Silence again. Different this time. Heavier. You never said that, she muttered. Exactly. Because I hadn't. Because in this family, the more you gave, the less they acknowledged it. Gratitude was treated like weakness. Recognition was reserved for people who demanded it loudly enough. I need you to fix this, she said finally, her voice smaller now, but still threaded with expectation. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No. The word landed between us like a door slamming shut. You're being cruel, she whispered. No, I said quietly. I'm being done. She hung up. No goodbye. No apology. Just the hollow click of a line that had always existed on her terms. 5 hours passed. 5 very quiet hours. Then the rest of them came. My mother called again, 3 times in a row this time. My father sent another message, longer now, less controlled. Kyle texted me next. This is low, even for you. That one actually made me laugh. Because coming from someone who keyed my car on camera, the moral judgment felt almost artistic. That night, they all showed up at my apartment again. Not one at a time. All together. This time, they didn't even pretend to be polite. They pounded on the door like they had a warrant. I opened it slowly. Not because I wanted to talk. Because I wanted to see what version of the story they were about to perform. My mother pushed in first again, but this time her expression was different, not controlled. Desperate. Naomi, she said, her voice soft in a way that felt rehearsed. Abby has nothing to do with this. She's innocent. I stepped aside just enough to let them in, then leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Innocent of what? I asked. My father didn't wait. He walked in like he owned the place. His anger already sharpened into something loud and aggressive. You're trying to sabotage her future, he said. Do you even hear yourself? This is pathetic. I tilted my head slightly. Is it? You're jealous, he continued. You've always resented that she's the favorite. That word. Favorite. They said it like it was normal. Like it was something to admit out loud without realizing what it meant. I let the silence sit for a second before answering. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I stopped paying for something I never agreed to fund. That's not how family works, my mother snapped. I looked at her. Really looked this time. And how does it work? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I pay, you all benefit, and then you call me a leech when I stop. That hit. Not enough to change anything, but enough to make them pause. So I kept going. I told them everything they had conveniently ignored. How the tuition payments had been dropped on me when Dad couldn't keep up. How no one asked me if I could afford it. How no one thanked me. How it just became expected. Another quiet responsibility I was supposed to carry without question. I reminded them about my car, about the scratches, about the footage. I reminded them about the TV, how my mother had walked into my apartment and taken it like she was collecting overdue rent. That stopped the room. For a second. Then Abby spoke, and she said the one thing that sealed everything. She looked straight at me and said, "You just love being the victim." There it was. Clean. Simple. Final. I nodded once. Get out, I said. No yelling. No escalation. Just certainty. My father opened his mouth like he wanted to argue. I didn't let him. All of you, I added. Get out of my apartment. My mother hesitated. Abby didn't move. Kyle rolled his eyes like this was all still some kind of performance. Figure it out yourselves, I said. Sell something, take out a loan, ask Emma's dog to sponsor you. That got a reaction. Not the one I cared about. But enough. They left. No last words. No dramatic exit. Just the sound of this door closing behind them. I stood there for a long time after they were gone. Waiting. Not for them to come back. For the next move. Because people like my parents didn't walk away from losing control. They escalated. And they didn't disappoint. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. Subtle at first. A cousin stopped liking my posts. Then another left a group chat without saying anything. Small things. Easy to ignore. Until they weren't. The first time I felt it clearly was at a grocery store. I ran into my aunt, Trish. The same woman who used to hug me before I could even say hello. This time she barely nodded. Hi, she said, stiff, already turning away. I stood there holding a frozen pizza, watching her walk off like I was someone she vaguely recognized from a bad memory. That was when it clicked. This wasn't random. This was narrative. 2 hours later, my cousin Jordan texted me asking if I wanted to grab coffee. I said yes. Not because I wanted to catch up. Because I wanted to hear it. We met the next afternoon. And the moment I sat down, I knew. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept turning the lid of his cup like it was going to give him answers. You know, everyone's talking about what you did to Abby, he said finally. I leaned back slightly. What exactly do they think I did? He hesitated. Then said it. They think you cut her off financially out of spite. That she's going to have to drop out. That you're punishing her because you're mad at your parents. I let the words settle. Then I asked, did anyone tell you I've been paying half her tuition for 2 years? He blinked. No, of course not. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. That part doesn't fit the story. He looked uncomfortable. Guilty, maybe, but not enough to challenge it. People rarely challenge the version of events that made things simpler for them. I left early. Said I had work, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the reason. The reason was that I had just watched my entire identity get rewritten in real time. Not just misunderstood. Rewritten, and my parents were holding the pen. The next hit came faster. Melissa from work pulled me aside that Friday. Her expression was careful. Too careful. Hey, she said quietly. Your dad called. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. He what? He called the office, she said, tried to reach HR. The air shifted. Not just heavy. Dangerous. What did he say? She hesitated. Said he was concerned about you. That you might be going through something. mentally. I didn't remember walking to HR. I just remember being there, sitting across from someone with a notepad, explaining everything before the story could reach them first. Because I knew how this worked. If you let someone else define you first, you spent the rest of your life trying to undo it. That night, I came home to a box sitting outside my door. No label, no return address, just cardboard, waiting. I carried it inside slowly, set it on the table, opened it. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Christmas mornings, birthdays, family trips, school plays. Every version of a memory that was supposed to mean something. Every version of me that used to belong somewhere. And in every single one, my face was gone, cut out, or scribbled over in thick black marker. Not messy, not rushed. Careful, deliberate. Like someone had taken their time deciding exactly where I didn't belong anymore. I stood there for a long time, not crying, not angry, just empty. Then I closed the box, carried it to the closet, and shut the door on it. Because that was the moment I understood something clearly. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to erase me. And if I stayed, they might actually succeed. The next time they tried something, it stopped being subtle. It happened in the middle of a workday. I was on a Zoom call, half listening, half drifting through slides I'd already seen, when my phone started vibrating against the desk. Once, twice, then nonstop. I ignored it at first. Then I saw the names. My downstairs neighbor, the building front desk, an unknown number. Something dropped in my stomach. I muted my mic and picked up the front desk call. "Naomi," the guy said, voice tight. "You should probably come downstairs." "What's going on?" A pause. "Someone's here about your car." That was all it took. By the time I got outside, there were 2 police cruisers parked at the curb, a tow truck idling nearby, and 3 officers standing next to my car. Half lifted already, tilted at an angle that made it look like it was being peeled out of my life. I walked straight toward them, pulse steady in that strange, detached way it gets when something is too absurd to feel real. "What's going on?" I asked. One of the officers turned toward me. "Are you Naomi Carter?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "We received a report that this vehicle has been abandoned. No plates. Sitting here for weeks." I blinked, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. I stepped past him, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out the registration. "Plates are current," I said, handing it over. "Registration's up to date. I parked it here last night." The officer scanned the paper, frowned, then glanced at the other 2. "Yeah, this doesn't add up," he muttered. The tow truck driver shifted awkwardly and started lowering the car back down. I crossed my arms. "Who made the report?" The officer hesitated just long enough for me to know I wasn't going to like the answer. "Do you know a Kyle Jensen?" "Of course I did." I let out a slow breath. "Yes." "He called it in," the officer said. "Said you moved out. Claimed the vehicle had been left here without plates for weeks." I stared at him for a second. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "Afraid not." For a moment, I couldn't even find the anger. It was buried under something sharper. Clarity. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a family argument. It was escalation. Calculated. Stupid, yes, but intentional. Kyle had tried to weaponize the system. Not to win. Just to inconvenience me. To scare me. To remind me they could reach into my life even when I wasn't standing in front of them. The officer handed my registration back. "You can press charges if you want," he said. "False reporting." I nodded. "I'll think about it." I already knew I wouldn't. Court meant time. Time meant energy. Energy meant giving them exactly what they wanted, my attention. And I was done spending that currency on people who treated it like it was disposable. I drove back to work in silence, but something had shifted. Before, it had felt like chaos. Now it felt like a pattern, and patterns could be predicted. 3 days later, I made another quiet move. I called Abby's University, asked to speak to financial services. When they picked up, I kept my voice neutral. "I need to remove myself completely from a student account," I said. "Any past associations, payment history, notes, everything." The woman on the line paused, then said, "I can take care of that." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Just so you know, her parents already called to update the payment method." I smiled slightly. "I figured." "They sounded surprised," she added. "I bet they did." I hung up and sat there for a moment, staring at nothing. That was the thing about people like my parents. They always believed control was permanent, until it wasn't. That weekend I packed a bag. Nothing dramatic, just enough for a few days. Clothes, laptop, documents. I booked an Airbnb 3 cities over and left without telling anyone. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. For the first time in months, I slept without my phone lighting up every hour. No missed calls, no messages, no reminders of who they thought I was. Just silence. And it felt unfamiliar, not empty, not lonely, just quiet. But silence never lasted. When I came back 2 days later, something felt wrong before I even unlocked the door. The hallway was still, too still. I turned the handle slowly. The door opened, unlocked, not wide open, just slightly ajar, enough to make my chest tighten. I stepped inside carefully. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken glass. No missing furniture. No obvious signs of anything. And that was what made it worse, because it meant whoever had been here hadn't needed to force their way in. I moved through the apartment slowly. Kitchen, living room, bedroom, everything in place, until I saw it. A single piece of paper on the kitchen counter, right where my cereal bowl usually sat. I didn't touch it at first. I just stood there staring. Then I stepped closer. 2 words. Printed. Clean. Deliberate. Run all you want. That was it. No signature. No explanation. No threat. But it didn't need one, because it said everything. Someone had been inside my apartment. Someone who knew where I kept things. Someone who didn't need to take anything, because the message wasn't about loss. It was about access. I didn't call the police. I didn't need to. They would ask for proof. Ask about forced entry. Ask who had keys. And I already knew the answer to that last one. My parents. From years ago. Back when trust still existed in small, stupid ways. I stood there for a long time, holding my breath, like if I stayed still enough, I might hear something. A sound. A trace. Anything. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The soft tick of the clock. And the realization that this had crossed into something else entirely. That night, I packed properly. Not a weekend bag. Everything I couldn't replace. Documents, clothes, hard drives, anything that mattered. I booked another Airbnb, longer this time. Then I texted my landlord. Breaking the lease early, I'll cover the fee. No explanation, no apology. Just logistics. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't trust who they might talk to. Who might talk to my parents. Who might accidentally give away where I was going. By the time I got on the road, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger. Distance. 5 hours later, I crossed into a new city. Different air, different streets, no family within 200 miles. And for the first time, I exhaled. But even distance couldn't erase them completely. 3 days into settling in, I got a message from an unknown number. Everyone knows what you did. I blocked it. Then, a DM from a second cousin I barely remembered. Hope you're proud. You ruined Abby's future over your ego. Blocked. Another message. Another accusation. Different names. Same script. My parents had done what they always did. They had taken the story and passed it around like gossip at a church table. And people believed it because it was easier than asking questions, easier than confronting the truth. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. Because defending yourself to people who already decided you're wrong is just another way of begging to be heard. And I was done begging. Now I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment just outside the city. New job. New routines. Neighbors who didn't know my history. Didn't care. Some nights I checked the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. Not because I thought someone was coming, but because my body hadn't caught up to my new life yet. Muscle memory. From a world where doors didn't mean safety. Sometimes I wondered about Abby. If she stayed in school. If Kyle was still around. If my parents ever regretted how far they pushed things. But I never reached out. Never asked. Because some chapters don't close with resolution. They close with distance. And that had to be enough. 3 months passed. No calls. No visits. No messages. I started to believe. Maybe it was over. I even started seeing someone. Quietly. Carefully. I didn't tell him everything. Just enough. That my family and I didn't talk. That it was complicated. He didn't push. And I didn't offer. Because peace, when you find it after chaos, feels fragile. Like something you don't touch too hard. Then, one Thursday afternoon, it came back. Not with a call. Not with a message. But with a package. The package didn't come to my apartment. That was the first thing that felt wrong. It was waiting for me at work. The receptionist handed it over with a polite smile. It's marked personal. No return address. No label I recognized. Just my name. I carried it to my desk without opening it, set it down, and stared at it for a full minute. Something in my chest tightened. Not fear. Recognition. Because this was how they operated now. Quiet. Indirect. Personal. I didn't open it there. I didn't even take it to my work laptop. Instead, I finished my shift like nothing had happened, slipped the package into my bag, and took it home. There was an old spare laptop in the back of my closet, one I used for junk files, disconnected from anything important. I powered it on, sat at my kitchen table, and opened the box. Inside was a USB stick. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Just data. I held it between my fingers for a second, turning it slowly. Then I plugged it in. 3 files appeared on the screen. 1 video, 1 PDF, 1 folder labeled insurance. I opened the video first. It took me a second to recognize it. Then it hit me. It was from my old job, almost a year ago. I was standing near the elevator, talking to a coworker, a man from another department. We were laughing about something small, waiting for the doors to open. Normal, harmless. Except it wasn't presented that way. The footage was shaky, clearly recorded from a distance, zoomed in at certain moments, slowed down in others, cut in a way that made proximity look like intimacy. That made casual body language look deliberate. I stared at the screen, my reflection faintly visible in the dark edges of the video. Someone had been watching. Not just that day. Not just that moment. Watching enough to know where to stand. How to frame it. What to capture. I closed the video, opened the PDF. My hands didn't shake. They didn't need to, because I already knew what I was about to see. It was a statement. Typed. Formatted. Clean. Written as if it were from me. A confession. It claimed I had engaged in inappropriate relationships at work, that I had manipulated colleagues, that I had a pattern of misconduct. It read like something you'd expect from a corporate scandal, the kind of document that gets leaked quietly before someone disappears from a company overnight. Except it wasn't real. None of it was. Not a single word. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Then I opened the folder. Insurance. The name alone made something settle in my chest. Inside were screenshots, emails, messages, documents, some real, most not. Conversations I had never had, emails I had never written, timestamps that didn't line up, a resignation letter with my name at the bottom that I had never signed. At first glance, it looked convincing. At second glance, it was careful, constructed, like someone had taken fragments of truth and wrapped them in just enough fiction to make them dangerous. I sat there in silence. The room felt too still, too quiet. And then it clicked. This hadn't been thrown together after the brunch. This hadn't started when I canceled the tuition. This had been building long before that. Someone had been collecting, recording, editing, preparing, waiting. The brunch, the argument, the fallout. That was just the moment I stepped out of line. The moment I stopped playing the role they had written for me. And this was what they had ready in case I ever did. Insurance. In case I spoke up. In case I fought back. In case I refused. I closed the laptop slowly. Sat there with my hands resting on the table. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel afraid. I felt clear, because this changed something. Not the past. Not what they had done. But what came next. They thought this was a warning, a threat, a way to keep me quiet, to keep me small. But they made one mistake. They assumed I still had something to lose. I didn't. I lost them the day they stood in my living room and demanded I pay for their champagne brunch. The day they called me a leech. The day they scratched my car, took my TV, sent me photos where I didn't exist anymore. That was the end. This was just proof. So I did the only thing that made sense. I copied everything. Every file. Every screenshot. Every piece of their insurance. I backed it up twice. Once to a secure drive. Once to a cloud account under a different name. Then I sent a copy to a lawyer I trusted. No explanation. Just a message. Hold this, I may need it. I sent another copy to a friend out of state. Someone far enough removed that they couldn't be reached through family. Again, no details. Just insurance of my own. Then I closed the laptop, unplugged the USB, and put it back in the box. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't confront. Because this wasn't a fight anymore. Not the kind they understood. This wasn't about yelling, or proving a point, or winning an argument. This was about timing. About patience. About letting them believe, for just a little while longer, that they were still in control. That I was still reacting, still running, still scared. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my apartment, at the quiet, at the life I had rebuilt, piece by piece, without them. And for the first time since this all started, I smiled. Not because it was over, but because now I knew exactly what it was. Not a family, not a misunderstanding, not even revenge, a system. And systems could be dismantled, carefully, deliberately, from the inside out. They thought this was a cold war, silent, tense, unpredictable. But they were wrong, because wars end. This was something else. This was a countdown.